talking about the Gulf War, in which George Bush Sr., so George Bush Jr.'s father, was the president, and this was in response to Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait and the effort to kick him out of that country. So just for a little bit of context, what happened is that Saddam Hussein in 1990 invaded Kuwait. And this was because, he saw Kuwait as the 19th province of Iraq, because like the British, when they carved up the territory, they took away most of Iraq's coastline and gave it to Kuwait. And so Saddam Hussein, who had just come out of the Iraq-Iran war, which had been a 8-year-long war, which cost many lives and yet didn't really have much territorial gain. Iraq was bankrupt as a result of this. And so what he wanted to do was basically invade the tiny oil-rich country of Kuwait, and then that way he would have even more oil. So when he invaded Kuwait, there wasn't very much resistance, and he was able to knock it out very quickly. But further to the south, you had the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the oil fields there were just a few hundred miles away. And the problem with all this was that the Saudi army was very weak, and it wouldn't have taken much for Saddam's army, which at the time was, I believe, either the 4th or the 5th largest army in the world, for him to have marched on straight there and taken the Saudi oil fields. And this panicked both the Saudi government and also the US government, because within the Middle East, America wanted to maintain a balance of power, and for a dictator like Saddam Hussein to basically be able to sweep in and take all that oil, yes, it was something which the Americans couldn't stand, and it's something which obviously the Saudis couldn't stand either. And so the US under George Bush offered to put troops in Saudi Arabia in order to defend Saudi Arabia, and also in the event of him not retreating from Kuwait, for him then to go and liberate Kuwait from Iraqi forces. Now this troop deployment had ramifications, which we'll get onto a little bit later, but for now all you need to know is that there was a coalition of many different countries around the world, and they, under the banner of the UN, were intent on pushing Saddam's forces out of Kuwait. Saddam Hussein refused, and so this inevitably led to what happened the next year, which was Operation Desert Storm. So this was the incredibly successful campaign led by the American General Schwarzkopf. It basically was like a World War II kind of pincer maneuver, where basically the Saudis thought that the attack was going to come through Kuwait, but they left their flanks completely open, and so as a result the British and the Americans swung round and basically encircled the entire Iraqi army. And as the Iraqi army was retreating out Kuwait, there was an aerial bombing campaign along the famous Highway 80, and Saddam's forces were completely wiped out. And obviously it did kill many civilians, but for the most part it killed his retreating troops. Now on a strategic level, what would have happened in most wars would have been that they would have carried on pushing all the way to Baghdad, overthrown Saddam, and then that would have been that. But this didn't end up happening. The reason for this is that the UN only gave support for the Americans and their allies to basically kick them out of Kuwait, but not to push forward. The UN wasn't in favour of regime change. And so as a result, George Bush Sr. just kind of left it at that. And so this timeline imagines what would have happened if he had just been like his son and ignored what the UN said and pushed on anyway. So this is what we're going to look into in this video. Now in our own timeline, what ended up happening after the liberation of Kuwait was that Iraq ended up having many sanctions put upon it. So its oil was not able to be sold in the open market, and many of its other exports weren't either, right? And as a result, the Iraqi economy contracted. And this was done in an effort to limit the Iraqi capacity to launch another war like this, and also, to put sanctions on the Saddam regime as a punishment for how they had acted. Now, people criticised this sanction regime because they, at the time it was reported that up to 500,000 Iraqi children had died from it. However, since the subsequent invasion of Iraq in 2003, most of the studies that have looked into it have found that actually a lot of this was to do with Saddam Hussein's propaganda, and basically they played up and over-exaggerated the numbers. And when experts went there, they found that actually the child mortality rate didn't decline by a significant amount. It had been 40 out of 1,000 beforehand, and it kind of stayed at around that level. So if 500,000 Iraqi children died out of a population of 23 million, it's kind of, it would have popped up quite easily. But as it is, it's kind of inconclusive as to exactly how many people died. However, after the war, what ended up happening was that a number of Shias end up rising up as well as the Kurds. So, for those who don't know, Iraq is made up of three separate groups. So you have the Sunni Arabs, you have the Shia Arabs, who make up the majority, and you have the Kurds in the north, who want to have their own state. And so Saddam Hussein was a Sunni Arab, and yet he suppressed the majority Shias, and he also suppressed the Kurds, notably when he gassed the Kurds in 1988. And so to stop this, the Americans and the British implemented a no-fly zone over Iraq. So basically what they did is they flew thousands and thousands of sorties over southern Iraq and northern Iraq to ensure that Saddam's forces couldn't just carpet bomb these people and gas them as they had done in 1988. But beside this, they did nothing else. They didn't support the uprisings. They didn't offer them any aid. They didn't offer them any help at all. And so as a result, Saddam's land forces were able to go in and crush these uprisings. And so the next 12 years end up just being a situation where Iraq was very poor, still very divided, and you still had this terrible dictator running the country.